Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. I have a Facebook secret group, as you guys know, and somebody requested that I do a podcast about when you identify as the opposite gender parent and how that impacts your lens through which you view marriage. And so that is what this episode is about. Should be interesting. Before we get to that, join the Facebook secret group, because that's where you can talk unfettered by the knowledge that your friends and family can see your comments. So you're in a private space, only $4.99 a month. You talk to other smart people, no trolls in there. And also, please do subscribe for 200 extra episodes. Okay, so when you are little, you tend to identify with the same-sex parent, right? And so this is not talking about relationships that are not heterosexual. The majority of my clients are in heterosexual relationships. When you are not in a heterosexual relationship, when you're in a homosexual relationship, then you just kind of pick who's more similar to you and you identify with whoever that is. But when there are these When you're a little boy, then you tend to think that you're like your father. In some ways, when you're a little girl, you tend to think you're like your mother. In some ways, if it is a healthy family and both people are thought of as positive. Now, in a situation where it's very dysfunctional, like let's say mom is an alcoholic and dad is not, then more little girls would identify with dad, because they don't want to be like an alcoholic like mom, if that's like something that's discussed. Or if dad is raging and angry, then more little boys would identify with the mother explicitly. Like if somebody said, oh, who are you more like? Not that people really say that to children, but if they did, and as the child gets older, they would identify with the mother instead of the raging, angry father, even if they're more like the raging, angry father in reality, because nobody wants to be like that person. But in a somewhat healthy family where there are considered to be positives and negatives of both parents, then generally, without thinking deeply about it, most people would say that they're more like the parent that's the same gender. So what happens, though, then when you get into your own marriage, you kind of assume that your marital dynamic is going to be the same as the one that you saw growing up. So let's say that your dad was more dominant personality and your mom was more submissive personality. You still assume, even if underneath, you're more submissive, you're more like your mother, you're more passive, you still would assume that somehow your wife would be even more passive than you, and somehow you, within the marital context, would manifest into this more dominant persona because that's what you saw and that's what tracks along gender lines. But that's not going to go like that, right? So, because you're not really like that other parent. You're not like your same gender parent. You're like the opposite gender parent. So what you sometimes then realize is, oh my God, it's like the relationship is switched. Like my wife tells me what to do the same way as my father told my mother what to do. Man, I must be a pussy, and you end up with this like really bad feeling about yourself because you are not adhering to the template that was implicitly set out for you. So I see that with men very often, with that idea of the dad being the more dominant person, but then they're not the more dominant person. So that in reality, they end up feeling like their own marriage is a failure, even though if they had seen their dad, be the more passive one and the mom be the one who said, we're going to do this and that and this, and their marriage went that way, then they would feel like, oh, I'm in a pretty normal marriage. But when it doesn't hit the same as the template that you saw, then it starts a level of insecurity that your marriage is somehow wrong and your parents' marriage is right. Again, this is mostly when you think that your parents' marriage was pretty good, And how does it mostly work with women is when their mother was treated as the princess and she was put on a pedestal by the father and thought of as very pretty, and that was talked about, and she was really kind of cherished in this way as being beautiful and put on a pedestal. But then in her relationship, she is more like the people-pleasing father who is doing all that complimenting, the one who's more comfortable being behind the scenes. And so her husband is the one that she puts on a pedestal, but then she feels like a failure because somehow her marriage does not work like her parents' marriage, and she is not the one that is told how beautiful she is all the time, even though she doesn't even want that, and that would be very uncomfortable to her. She's more of a VP than a president, And so basically what we're talking about here is the power dynamic in the marriage. Yeah, it's nice to say that it's 50-50 in every marriage, but it's not 50-50. Nothing is really 50-50. This is not a math class. We're talking about human relationships. And there's always a more dominant partner that gets more airtime, and that is more of, quote, main character energy. And when that switches from gender lines, from what you grew up with, then you are more likely to find yourself and your marriage to be lacking in some way and to have some sort of insecurities about not being as good as your same-sex parent without thinking about your own personality and the fact that irrespective of gender, you just saw one template. So what happens basically is you see one template growing up, and based on your own personality, you pick one side that makes sense to you based on who you are. So your own temperament, your own 5-factor, big 5 personality traits, you basically pick which parent to be like subconsciously based on who you are more similar to and who you identify with more. Especially when it is not egregious that like one parent is, quote, bad, or in a single parent home, then there is no other parent. So then you look at allo parents and grandparents and this and that for other role models if you're really not similar to your parent. But in a situation where it's anything less than completely egregious and abusive behavior by one parent, usually both people are thought to have a personality with positives and negatives, and you kind of ally implicitly and model yourself on one of the only 2 options that you have, the one that's more similar to you. So if you think about this, I see this a lot with guys who are insecure about the amount of power that they have in the relationship. And so they will compare themselves unfavorably. I have a podcast, When Your Father Out Alphas You. So that's really relevant to this, If you feel that you do not have the right amount of power in your relationship and you're comparing yourself to your father who had a lot of power in the relationship, then you may feel that your relationship somehow is a failure. When in reality, you aren't that kind of person that wants to have all the dominant power in a relationship. And because you have an imago of your father, you may have been drawn to somebody who has all the power in the relationship. Not all, of course, I'm hyperbolizing, but somebody who makes more of the decisions than you do. And that could be fine, and it would be okay if that was the template that you saw. But in fact, it was the template you saw. You are just being your mother person in that scenario. And so when people go into deep insight-oriented therapy, they think about these things. They think, what are the expectations and the assumptions that I brought into my marriage? and that shape my self-esteem and my confidence levels based on what I saw growing up. What did I think of as a man? What did I think of as a woman? What did I think of as a marriage? And then you interrogate some of these things and you say, was the relationship that I saw between my parents really so perfect? Who really, it isn't. I mean, no human is perfect. So there were positives and negatives in their relationships. Which ones would I want to emulate? Which ones would I want to work on? Since I can understand why subconsciously I would only think I had kind of two options of how to act in a relationship. Two parents showed me how to act in a relationship. Oh, and by the way, some people are like, oh, but I had lots of aunts and uncles. Yeah, cool. You didn't see those people every single day. Even if you saw them every day, you didn't see them the whole day. So they could be protective and they could be a buffer and offer a different way to think about the world. And that is wonderful and protective and adaptive. However, the people that you see every single day are obviously going to shape you more. It's like, if you're a dog, you are trained by your owner. Your owner's sister may be really nice to you, but unless she takes you for 3 years, you're going to act however your owner trains you to act. Now, it's the same with us. We're mammals, as I discuss all the time. So, for example, getting back to the individual, let's say the woman example that I gave before. So let's say she thinks, you know what, I don't really mind being the one who is the more of the hype man in this relationship and the one who does not take center stage. I really kind of did think my mother was a bit self-absorbed. I didn't really identify with that aspect. I identified much more with my father, who's always trying to do nice things for her and, buoy her up. But I think, honestly, when I think about it, their relationship was a little bit one-sided, and my mother was a little bit childlike in how much she craved that admiration. So personally, I know that now I'm talking about it in therapy, etc., that I tend to kind of give my husband so many compliments and praise him like a child for doing the smallest little thing, taking a page out of what my father's book was with my mother. But you know what? I really don't like that. It doesn't feel genuine to me anymore. I don't like how it makes him act like he's so great all the time. He could be arrogant. Probably my mother also was arrogant in many ways. And I think I'm going to pull back on some of that and act more authentic. Really praise him if I think he did something good, but not make that my default kind of daily ego stroking in the manner that I learned from my father to do with my mother. So that would be kind of, and by the way, the marriage is going to founder a little bit, for a little bit of time as the husband realizes that she's no longer just going to, compliment him constantly. But it certainly goes a lot better if she says, I realize that I learned to be a people pleaser from my father and I'm going to be working on that because it's starting to feel uncomfortable for me, And so that's, by the way, how change happens. It happens stepwise. Everything, it's not linear. Oh, one person's healthier, now the marriage is better. It doesn't go like that. Sometimes, let's say that the woman's husband, there is a real narcissist. He may be done with that marriage. She stops complimenting him so much. Well, she feels better about herself and she feels more like a person that's an equal. But maybe he gets sick of being just treated like an equal and he wants to be back on the pedestal. So in some cases, really there can be problems after one person changes in a more positive way for them. But in most cases, if the marriage is at all healthy, then after a bit of, after a little rough patch, it can recalibrate and get back onto a healthier track overall that feels authentic for both people. So that's just an example of how, that doesn't even have to do with anything about gender and parent or anything. It just has to do with if you work on your mental health and you start to work on aspects of yourself that you're not comfortable with, then as I've discussed many times, you may need to get into couples therapy because you need to recalibrate and figure out which direction the marriage is going with this new dynamic. But overall, I do hope that this provided some insight into a different way to view why you don't feel so good about your relationship. If it does not mimic the one that you saw, you like your father and you like your mother, I'm talking to the man like the father and the woman like the mother, then if you thought that was a happy marriage, even if your own marriage is fine, you may feel a little bit off kilter. Like, wait a second, this is not exactly what I was raised to think a happy marriage looks like. But you need to do deeper work then and think, how am I really structured? What's my personality type? What are my needs in this relationship? You know, what part of what I'm doing is conscious and what part of it is subconscious? If you've not been in therapy, if you've not ever really thought about these things, most of it's subconscious, you know? And so figuring out these links between how you learn to be from your upbringing and how you are now, that's like the most transformative, impactful work. And realizing those patterns originated and they were learned shows you that you can learn other patterns too, because this isn't just how life goes and how everything has to be, but rather you learned a certain way of thinking and now perhaps you can learn a different way of thinking as well. And you can, in fact. All right, I hope y'all enjoyed this. Please do join the Facebook secret group, blue subscribe button on my Facebook page, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day, guys.